In honor of Mother's Day, today we're taking a look at which cartoon moms deserve flowers and which ones deserve a visit from Child Protective Services.
Well, I ruined Steve.
This is the Cartoon Mom Tier List. Kicking this list off, we have the tier reserved for mothers who aren't going to be getting flowers and cards today, abusive at worst and neglectful at best. This is the D tier, reserved for the truly terrible moms. Picking out the worst mom in cartoon history seemed like a daunting task. That is until we remembered Mrs. Doofenshmirtz from Phineas and Ferb. What is a mother? And we're talking like the most basic definition of one. A mother is a woman who's given birth to a child, or at the very least nurtured one to some degree. Therein lies Mrs. Doofenshmirtz's problem. This woman literally didn't show up for her own son's birth. It's cruddy enough for a dad to not show up for his child's birth, but the mother? Did she just pop him out and leave immediately? Abandonment would be bad enough on its own, obviously, but Mrs. Doof takes it a step further. She psychologically abused Heinz, constantly forcing him to dress as a little girl because she wanted a daughter, making him stand in isolation as the family garden gnome for days on end, and blatantly favoring his older brother Roger while giving Heinz no affection whatsoever. Mrs. Doofenshmirtz failed as a mother so badly that she quite literally created a supervillain. And you know what? There's a reason nobody hates Doofenshmirtz despite all the horrible things he's done. You know what that reason is? At least he actually loves his kid. If we had to give Mrs. Doofenshmirtz points for something, it'd be that she does genuinely love Roger, but that's nowhere near enough to make up for how poorly she treats Heinz. Up next, we have a parent who was more present, but, well, not in a good way. Beatrice Horseman admittedly went through a lot in her life, and while we do sincerely feel for her, it's no excuse for how she treated Bojack. She was incredibly neglectful and verbally abusive to him, and the latter was when he was lucky enough to have any attention from her. She remained a toxic influence on her son's life well into her old age and never really showed any desire to change for the better. Her worst attribute has to be directly telling Bojack that his birth ruined her life, even from his childhood.
You ruined me, Bojack.
I know.
Bojack is a pretty sleazy guy who takes decades to even start to grow as a person, and while he's ultimately responsible for his own actions, Beatrice's abusive parenting style didn't help. Let's not forget that heartbreaking scene in the season 6 premiere where it's revealed that he first drank as a young child because seeing his mom blacked out drunk, he saw an opportunity to finally snuggle up to her. That's we don't have a joke for that. That's just sad. The only reason Beatrice isn't dead last is that unlike Mrs. Doofenshmirtz, she at least had some sympathetic qualities, but frankly they're mostly just out of pity. Third from the bottom is Moral Oral's Blauberta Puppington. Mother of the titular character Oral, Blauberta might appear at first to be a Maud Flanders type, a Christian wife who's perfectly content to just help around the house and raise her kids. But as you might tell from Clay not being even adjacent to a Ned Flanders type, this is a very misleading way of viewing her. We could go on about how horrible Blauberta is as a wife. She did get Clay back into alcohol before they got married, after all, but how is she as a mother? Well, not much better. She's not outwardly abusive towards her children, but she is highly neglectful, not caring for their happiness and only caring very little for their safety. She is occasionally shown to be sympathetic towards Oral, though, and in the series finale, Oral as an adult is shown to have a picture of her and Clay in his house, showing that he still loves her to some degree. It's not exactly confirming that she's improved any as a parent, but again, she's not outwardly abusive, nor has her son completely written her off, which leaves some room for doubt as to if she's truly beyond redemption. At the tail end of this category is Agnes Skinner from The Simpsons. Agnes, like Beatrice, is extremely controlling and verbally abusive to Skinner. She resents him for many reasons, not the least of which being his first kick in the womb causing her to lose her shot at winning the 1952 Olympics pole vault. But, as you probably don't need us to tell you, that's not a valid reason to resent and berate your adult son every opportunity you can get. When Agnes is not being excruciatingly mean-spirited to Skinner, she's still controlling him against his will, to the point where it's been implied that Skinner wishes she were dead sometimes, and honestly, we barely blame him. The only reason she's even this high is that while she is an awful mother, she's not exactly neglectful, which isn't much of an achievement, but in this list's context, it's enough to put her on the better end of a bad bunch. Moving on to the C tier, these mothers are still pretty lackluster, but they're at least trying. The main difference is that if nothing else, they do sincerely love their kids, to some extent. This might get us some heat, but kicking off the C tier is Lois Griffin from Family Guy. We were conflicted as to whether Lois should end the last category or kick off this one. Make no mistake, while she isn't necessarily outwardly abusive, Lois is still a scummy parent more often than not, especially in regards to Meg. When Meg gets a boyfriend in Go Stewie Go, she makes out with him while Meg is away, showing that she has no regard for her daughter's feelings. She almost never shows compassion for her, and when she does, it's usually half-hearted, or she abandons it partway through, like abandoning her spring trip with Meg to get absolutely plastered. That said, there are times when she shows care for her kids. She genuinely loves Stewie, even having trouble bringing herself to fight him when he takes over the world. As for Chris and Meg, while she's usually much worse to them, it's rarely intentional, and she'll usually do her best to make up for whatever she does wrong. There are even some times where she'll stand up for her kids. In the episode, And the Wiener Is, Lois sends Quagmire over to Connie's house as revenge for her pranking Meg and tricking her into kissing a pig. In Halloween on Spooner Street, she straight up extorts candy from the mother of the boy who stole Stewie's.
Thanks. Now we want Justin's candy.
Lois may hurt her kids, but you'd best watch out if you ever plan on doing the same to them, and that sort of motherly love, while not consistent, keeps her out of the bottom category. Following her, we have Beth Smith from Rick and Morty. Really, Beth has the most stereotypical characteristics of a bad adult cartoon mother, and then some, without many good ones to balance it all out either. She's fairly open about how much disdain she has for her kids, and while she isn't outwardly hateful towards them most of the time, she's still rather callous to them even on a good day. As for why she's even this high, well, she does show, albeit very rarely, concern for her kids. She clearly favors Jessica, but there are some times when she reveals some level of care for Morty too. And if nothing else, while she's made plenty of terrible mistakes, compared to the stuff Lois has done, they're not even on the same level. Moving into the less horrible parents, we have Miriam Pataki from Hey Arnold. One of the darkest aspects of this series as an adult is the clear portrayal of parental favoritism and neglect shown by Miriam. While she dotes on Olga, Helga is put on the back burner and neglected more often than not. What's more, she also portrays addiction due to her frequent enjoyment of smoothies.
Hiya, Mom. We'll just say you and me mix up a batch of smoothies.
We have a feeling there's something more to those than just fruit and coconut water. The only thing separating Miriam from the D-tier mothers is that she is at least shown occasional concern for Helga, and some level of desire to improve as a mother. When her career causes her to neglect Helga, she leaves it in order to spend more time with her. It doesn't erase her mistakes, but she at least cares on some level. When it comes to parental neglect, few examples are more infamous than Timmy's mom from The Fairly Odd Parents. It takes a special kind of ignorance to let your son get literally tortured by his babysitter for years without realizing it. Timmy's mom spends very little time with him, usually preferring to spend nights out with Mr. Turner while leaving her son with Vicky. That said, she has occasionally shown care and concern for Timmy. In Channel Chasers, she and Mr. Turner search high and low when he runs away, and in Poof's Playdate, they show a desire to become better parents after watching the wise advice of Dr. Bill. She's not Mother of the Year, but again, she's trying. That's the key right now. While she may not be the most pleasant person, Sheila Broflovsky could be worse as a parent. She's your typical overprotective / helicopter parent. She's guilty of sheltering her kids and often taking her own frustration and worries out on them by yelling, but also she sincerely does care about them at the end of the day. She's a very flawed mother, and she started a war with Canada, but by the end, at least she seemed to have learned her lesson. Okay, this next one's been done to death, but we couldn't resist mentioning Doris, aka Caillou's mom, or as she's always referred to in the show, simply Mommy. I'm not calling her that again. You all probably know her by now. Caillou is a show about a whiny kid who complains and cries constantly, sometimes for understandable reasons, and other times because he's a demon child. Said demon child is often enabled by his mother, who never bothers to discipline her boy for his bad behavior. There used to be this theory that was actually pretty sweet, where the whole reason she let him get away with things was because little Caillou was a cancer patient. But as that one Family Guy gag revealed, Caillou didn't have cancer. The creators just made a weird choice.
But Caillou wasn't a cancer survivor. The show's creators just made a weird choice.
So while Doris may not be malicious, she's not really a competent mother either. But she loves Caillou at least, and given that he's Caillou, that in itself is an achievement. This is a bit of a deep cut, but we couldn't help but mention Bunny Ruckus from the Boondocks. Mother to Uncle Ruckus, she was a very conflicting character to place. On the one hand, Bunny loves Uncle Ruckus dearly, spending time with him constantly and comforting him after he's abused by his father. On the other hand, well, you know how Uncle Ruckus is. Well, Uncle Ruckus? Yeah, it turns out that Bunny is the reason that Ruckus is a self-hating, delusional racist. In her one appearance episode, The Color Ruckus, it's revealed at the dinner table that Bunny decided it would be a good idea to raise Ruckus like he was a white boy with re-vitiligo so he'd have more confidence. This has to be one of the worst parenting decisions in the history of parenting decisions, but if nothing else, she is a big comfort to Ruckus even in his adulthood. Next up is the dim-witted but lovable Francine Smith from American Dad. Say what you will about Franny in terms of competence, she can behave irresponsibly, drinks way too much, and does mistreat and manipulate her kids on occasion. That said, she's made up for by the fact that she does genuinely love them. Her occasional mistreatment of her kids comes less from malice and more from a place of genuinely not understanding how poorly she's treating them. At the end of the day, for every bad thing Francine does to her kids, there's more than enough examples of her protecting them, even if she's not very good at it, like in the episode Bully for Steve, where she's genuinely concerned about Steve being beaten up, only to be very slow at finding out who it is that's doing it.
You're Steve's bully?
She's far from the most moral mother on our list, but she loves her family, that much is clear. Maybe even a little too much, given how she secretly kept Steve on breast milk for years on end. Rounding out the C-tier mothers is the brilliant mind behind such recipes as Frito pie with Wolf brand chili, Peggy Hill. As Bobby's mother from King of the Hill, Peggy's one of the more realistic mothers in the world of animation.
I am what the magazines call a superwoman.
Which has gained her no small amount of scrutiny. While she clearly loves Bobby, she's also easily antagonized by him when she senses a threat to her role as the house matriarch. When Bobby becomes better at cooking than Peggy, to the point where Hank puts him in charge of preparing the Thanksgiving turkey,
Do you think you could make this buttermilk-basted turkey?
Peggy steals it and runs away, forcing the boys to apologize for effectively not doing anything wrong. But despite what some fans might have you believe, moments like these are relatively few and far between. She can be a control freak and sometimes a downright irresponsible parent, but at other times she's the emotional support her son needs, even helping Hank be less of a stick in the mud and connect with him on occasion. While she's nowhere near perfect, Peggy isn't a monster nor even a horrible mother, and we can't ignore that much of her narcissistic tendencies are due to the head injury she sustained after a skydiving accident. It's not an excuse, but it is an explanation, and frankly, for a narcissist, she could be way worse. Now we're entering the territory of mothers who, although still flawed, manage to stand on their own 2 feet in terms of parenting. This is the B tier. Next, we have one of those new friends mentioned in the Cleveland Show's theme song, Donna Tubbs. True to the format of a Seth MacFarlane sitcom, she's by far the more responsible of her marriage, at least in the context of the Cleveland Show. She dearly loves her kids and does her best to show it. That said, she can be short-tempered with them at times, which may lead to her saying things that can be harmful. When Rollo becomes egotistical because of her letting him win a game of bowling, she sings an entire song about how kids suck at everything, and while that's nowhere near the worst thing anyone on this list has done, it's still a flaw that holds her back from being any higher up. But it doesn't take away from the fact that Donna is genuinely caring towards her kids and stepson, and does her best to take care of them and keep them happy. She's also very protective, shown by how mad she was when Peter shot Cleveland Jr. While her parenting is far from a major focus of the show, Bev Bighead is a better mom than you may expect. Like her husband, Mrs. Bighead had a hard time accepting her daughter, formerly son's, identity as a cartoonist, and later on as a transgender woman. However, she's much quicker to accept Rachel than her husband, not to mention her willingness to make amends and bridge the gap between them. Next up is the Proud family's Trudy Proud. Really, she's one of the most even parents on the list when it comes to good traits versus bad ones. On one hand, she can be a bit overbearing towards Penny, specifically when it comes to discipline. In one episode of the reboot, she locks Penny out of the house just because she came home late. From studying, mind you. This effectively made Oscar into the reasonable one, and if you've watched the show, you know how much of an achievement that is. On the other hand, despite her short temper, Trudy is ultimately a very forgiving and protective mother who's always there for Penny and her siblings when she's needed. Speaking of short-tempered mother figures, we'd be remiss if we didn't give Nicole Watterson a respectable spot. For all her anger, Nicole is an absolute ride or die for her family. In other words, you either ride with her or you die. Jokes aside, I'm not even sure if that was a joke, Nicole is perhaps the most mama bear mother in cartoon history. Take the Fury, for example. You could provoke her in countless ways, and for the sake of her career and honor, she'll just take it. But the second you threaten her family, it's straight up over. Do not pass go, simply pass away. Of course, Nicole is sometimes guilty of being overbearing towards her children and even taking her anger out on them. But when she realizes she's gone too far, she's ready to apologize and make amends, even when she's frankly got every right to be upset. Rounding out this category, we have Linda Lynn-Fletcher, mother of the titular Phineas and Ferb. She loves and cares about them in terms of both happiness and well-being, as shown by her encouragement of what she thinks is their imagination, and her concern when she actually does discover Phineas and Ferb's true activities. She also shows concern for Candace for what, again, she thinks is her being paranoid and obsessed with busting her brothers. I mean, she's right about the obsession, but they really did build that roller coaster, Mom!
Oh, Mom!
The worst we could say about Linda is that while she's not outright neglectful and dumb like Timmy's mom, she's still pretty much unaware of 90% of what her kids get up to. You could argue that's not even really her fault, but, well, the fact that her first response to the busting is to send the boys to what's basically a military torture camp to reform their bad behavior was maybe a little bit overboard. Just a teensy bit. In any case, she just barely misses out on the A-tier mothers. These moms stand out, whether it's for their particularly impressive character or the challenges they've overcome. First up, we have Tommy Pickles' mother, Dee Dee Pickles from Rugrats. When it comes to loving and nurturing her kids, Dee Dee is top-notch. She's always looking after the babies, making sure they're happy, healthy, and safe, well, most of the time. She can get distracted to the point where she totally misses them going on their own adventures, which are varying degrees of dangerous, but still worth noting. Perhaps Dee Dee's most questionable parenting trait is her reliance on Dr. Lipschitz's advice, however strange it may be. This is good in part because it shows that she takes parenting very seriously and wants to make the best decision in every possible situation, but it also shows a lack of individual preparedness for certain situations her babies might put her in regards to parenting. Regardless, this starfish-haired mama definitely loves her kids, and we'll only be seeing more of that as we progress through the list. From here to the stars, going by candy bars, rides Judy Neutron, the mother of a kid with a knack for invention. Judy and Jimmy aren't the closest mother-son pair on our list, but we place her high up regardless due to just how difficult her parenting life must be. I mean, in basically every episode, Jimmy is threatening anywhere from his own house to the entirety of Retroville, or even the whole world. Despite this, Judy doesn't keep him from pursuing his inventions. Rather, she does her best to keep him in check and reel him in when he goes too far. While she might sometimes be construed as overbearing or even naggy, we hold that she's just doing her best to keep the household running smoothly. Let's not forget that when she left for just a day, Jimmy resorted to building a robot resembling her. She keeps the household that balanced. If you think her parenting life is hard, wait until we talk about Rita Loud from The Loud House. Raising one genius child is enough, but raising one genius child plus 10 other children, each with very distinctive lives, is a whole nother ballgame. Rita's constantly busy, and while she does have her limits, she still somehow manages to make time for all of her kids, even with all the different stuff they have going on. If we had to take points away for anything, it'd probably be the episode Rita Her Rights, in which she repeatedly gets parking tickets to get community service hours and thus have some free time away from the house.
I'll just take the community service.
While that's pretty screwed up, we don't really blame her considering she's raising 11 kids and doing better than a lot of parents on the list who raised not even half that. In terms of actual parenting, we've seen almost nothing of this next one, but we couldn't go without mentioning Monique Sorenstein, aka Muscle Man's mom from Regular Show. You know, the one he's constantly making jokes about? Sure, we know borderline nothing about her as a parent, but with how protective Muscle Man is about anyone else making jokes about her other than himself, we have to assume she's pretty legendary. You know who else is pretty legendary? Well, speaking of characters with a ton of parenting experience, we next have Margaret Squarepants, mother to good old SpongeBob. She's a very minor character, only appearing here and there throughout the show, but like her husband Harold, she loves SpongeBob dearly and is always supportive of him. When SpongeBob needs to move back in with them in Home Sweet Pineapple, she's ready to come get him within days, and they're always happy to celebrate his achievements, from getting his license in No Free Rides to moving into the Krusty Krab in New Digs. It's easy to see where SpongeBob gets some of his good nature from. Now, we wish we could put her even higher, but Wanda from The Fairly Odd Parents is up next. We'd feel absolutely wrong if we didn't mention her. Wanda is the godmother of Timmy, mother of Poof, and in later seasons, basically the babysitter of Cosmo. She dearly loves Timmy and Poof and is very protective of them, often trying to keep the former from making wishes that are too reckless or just trying to steer him in the right direction in general. We really don't have anything to take points away from Wanda for either. She takes great pride and joy in making Timmy's life just a little happier, while at the same time nurturing him into becoming a better, less selfish person. She's a better mom than Mrs. Turner could ever hope to be, frankly, and if you ask us, she's the one Timmy should be giving a Mother's Day gift to. Just before we get into our top tier mothers, we're going to mention Ursa, the mother of Zuko and Azula from Avatar: The Last Airbender. Sure, we could have included Katara's mother, but come on. Does it really need to be said how perfect of a parent she is? Ursa, on the other hand, is more questionable at first glance. She seems at first to favor Zuko over Azula due to the darkness in the latter's heart.
Mom, want to see how Azula feeds turtle ducks?
But in actuality, it's clear as day, even to Azula, as desperately as she doesn't want to believe it, that Ursa loved her dearly and would have done anything for her. When push comes to shove, Ursa sacrifices her throne for Zuko's sake, striking a deal with Ozai so that she would be banished instead of the prince's life being taken. She made the best out of a horrible situation, and while you could argue that she could have done more in terms of her parenting towards Azula in particular, it's undeniable that she embodies a mother's self-sacrificing love unlike nearly any other. But we're entering S tier now, and these are the mothers who are just about perfect. We see them deal with their kids constantly and always lovingly. They might make mistakes, but they certainly aren't defined by them. Kicking off our top 5 is Clarence's mother, Mary Wendell. Clarence is one of the lesser-sung Cartoon Network shows from the 2010s, but regardless of your thoughts on it, it's hard to deny just how good of a mom Mary is to her boy. She supports him and his imagination, making games out of even mundane activities so he doesn't get bored, all the while encouraging him on his own various adventures, while making sure he doesn't go too far off the deep end, of course. On top of being a loving mother and stable provider for Clarence, Mary doesn't really have any bad characteristics to speak of, which earns her a top-tier spot on our list. Landing just outside of the top 3 is perhaps the most iconic mother in cartoon history, Marge Simpson. Mother to Bart, Lisa, and Maggie, Marge is the glue that holds the Simpson family together. She loves her kids dearly and always makes sure to put them first. She's a nurturing mother to each of her children and at the same time knows how to keep them in check. And yes, that last one is mainly in regards to Bart. The early episode, Moaning Lisa, shows one of Marge's best characteristics, compassion. Rather than insisting Lisa appear happy for the sake of keeping up appearances, she breaks the cycle and encourages Lisa to be sad if she needs to. Marge is also willing to admit when she's wrong. When she joins a high-end club that won't accept her family, she turns them down and insists that she loves her flawed family just as they are. Even when Marge doesn't approve of her children's actions, there's never any doubt that she loves them dearly, and most importantly, she's always ready to crump with her son when it matters most.
I'll crump with you, sweetie pie.
Marge is a classic, but don't think newer moms can't do it too. The Bronze Medal of Motherhood goes to Linda Belcher from Bob's Burgers. Linda is much like Marge, not in terms of personality, but in terms of her love for her kids. She knows how to nurture and encourage each of them as individuals, wanting to bond with them and make sure none of them feel left out. There's really nothing in particular that makes us place Linda above Marge, though. Like Marge, she loves and supports her kids equally, and like Marge still, she's able to correct mistakes she occasionally makes. There's never any doubt that she loves her family above all else, which earns her an easy top-tier spot. And we're sure she'd be just as willing to crump when the situation calls for it as Marge is, if not more so. Moving even further into new cartoon territory, the Silver Medal of Motherhood goes to a mom the younger audiences will be happy to see, Chili Healer from Bluey. While Bluey is aimed at preschoolers, it's garnered a lot of positive attention from older audiences, due in no small part to the very wholesome dynamic between Chili, Bandit, and their daughters. I mean, really? These two are basically portrayed as the perfect parents, to the point where it almost feels unrealistic.
Thanks, Bluey. Try again, honey. I'll just hold it for you.
Chili is supportive, nurturing, and compassionate, while at the same time she's able to discipline her daughters and teach them valuable life lessons when the opportunity arises. It makes you wonder, what if there were another cartoon mom from a show aimed at younger audiences who was just as warm and fuzzy as Chili, if not more so, but with an added dose of realism? This may be a deep cut, but we're giving the Gold Medal of Motherhood to Mother Bear from Little Bear. If you aren't familiar with Little Bear, it's a cartoon based on a book series of the same name, and it might just be one of the most wholesome ones out there, in no small part thanks to Mother Bear. While we've described this entire tier as basically being for perfect parents, for Mother Bear, that's quite literal. She's raised a cub who's compassionate and caring towards everyone around him, and never fails to show him limitless love and affection. Her motherly love even extends to other kids around. When Little Bear meets a garden snake called No Foot, she's immediately willing to let him live with them after finding out he doesn't have a family. Now, in case you're not convinced, let's just recontextualize that real quick. Mother Bear just agreed to take in a complete stranger under her roof, makes sure he's comfortable by providing shelter and a personalized bed, and when it turns out the space is too cramped, lets him live in the garden. As in, Mother Bear literally took in an orphan with zero hesitation, and since Little Bear was doing the same, it's pretty clear where he gets it from.
I crown you Queen Mother Bear.
Mother Bear is the sweetest, most wholesome cartoon mother in existence, and she really doesn't even have anything adjacent to a bad quality, making her an easy choice for our top spot. Happy Mother's Day.
Mother's Day!